With the House suspended, the Honourable Member for Cat Island, Rumpkin, San Salvador had reserved the floor. The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Cat Island, Rumpkin, and San Salvador.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before moving on to my intervention in respect to this bill, I wish to offer to Mr. Hartman Munker, a constituent of Cat Island, knows his Cat Island, a hearty, happy birthday. Mr. Speaker, I think it's Psalm 90 that speaks to the length of our days. 70 we are promised, 80 if by strength. But I still am trying to discover, those of you, we have a number of religious persons, ordained persons in here. They could perhaps tell me what happens when you live more than 80. I know strength to 80, what happens after 80. Maybe the grace of God, maybe. But Hartman Munker has lived 103 years. And still has all of his marbles. And, you know, it was a good time I had the privilege to visit him last week. Oh, no, sorry, it was this Monday. When they were, and encountered a service that was just to begun, headed by Father Addington Turnquist. So I was able to participate in that. It was a good time to reflect when visiting him on the fact that age may slow us down and disappoint us in the mirror. But if we are still functioning and not in pain, we ought to be very grateful. And Mr. Munker is a very grateful soul. He's perhaps the oldest catechist in the Anglican Communion at this time, having served for an untold number of years. And from this place, I wish him and his family Godspeed, and him particularly happy birthday. And I pray that he enjoys more full years with the love of his family. Mr. Speaker, today I stand to offer sage advice. Sometimes I say I'm the senior member, but I say it in jest. But I remember my grandmother saying that the only thing to do with good advice is to pass it on, because it has no value otherwise. So I offer it. And even though we know the majority will have their way, we our say. In my say, I say it as advice. St. Thomas Aquinas, someone to whom the member from South Beach might be very familiar, has considerable influence on Western thought. In fact, much of his modern philosophy either agrees or disagrees with his ideas, particularly in respect of ethics, law, and politics. When we look at his works, Summa Theologiae, we see him and see his viewpoint that law is directed by its nature to the common good. He contends that the law should not primarily be addressed to private persons, but to the whole people. Mr. Speaker, governments therefore should be very careful to use the instruments of public policy to benefit the universal or the common good. That's what we must be careful. When we use the instruments of public policy, it must be directed to benefiting the universal good or the common good. I think it was former U.S. President Thomas Jefferson who apparently agreed to this fundamental tenet of governance. As he once said, every government degenerates when trusted to the rulers of the people alone. Every government degenerates when trusted to the rulers of the people alone. The people themselves are its only safe depositories. This is important because the people will always steer government in a general policy direction that delivers the greatest good to the greatest number of its citizens. Remember too, Mr. Speaker, it's the people's turn. This bill before us today begs the million-dollar question of whether it serves the common good or is designed to facilitate a private agenda driven by personality. Is this a policy imperative at the expense of the common good? If it does not pass this simple litmus test of governance, then it is probably redundant in the overall scheme of achieving the objective of good governance. Mr. Speaker, I narrow my focus to the Ministry of National Security. Thomas Jefferson also said that the care of human life and happiness is not their destruction. It's the first and only object of good governance. Within the context of the national security, I note that the outgoing Commissioner of Police, who was appointed by the side opposite during their last term in office, has security of tenure, guaranteed and protected by the Constitution. I also note that the incoming Commissioner of Police was a part of the executive command that executed the policies of national security, internal security, and public safety pursuant to the Police Act and best policing practices. Mr. Speaker, given the content, nature, tone, tenor, and letter of the recent address on crime delivered by our current Minister of National Security, there is no fundamental difference on crime policy between the current minister and his predecessor. The outgoing commissioner and the incoming commissioner at all material times were on the same crime-fighting strategic page, and clearly the current and former minister, and I dare say political administrations, were on the same crime-fighting page. So, Mr. Speaker, why the change? Why this amendment to the pensions bill? What is the policy imperative driving this change of face? The evidence before us clearly indicates, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that there's no difference or change in the policy direction of the Royal Bahamas Police Force in its fight against crime, just a continuation. If policy is the principal driver of this bill, then what is the new policy direction? Has there been a substantial policy shift since the National Security Minister outlined the government's crime plan in this honorable House? I did not hear of a policy shift, so one is led to conclude that the principal driver of this bill is the cult of personality, coupled with some minority or personal agenda. Some may go as far as to argue that the side opposite does not respect democracy because the rule of law guarantees, as I said before, in our Constitution, right, the security of tenure for the post of the Commissioner of Police. For some, it is just too convenient. For some, it is just too convenient that the post of Commissioner of Police attracts full gratuity and pension after just 7 years of service, when the initial law stipulated 10 years. How is the public good being served by this change? How is it? I appreciate the principle enshrining security of tenure in the Constitution as a defense mechanism against political interference, as the integrity of the office of the Commissioner of Police, its work and the administration of justice broadly are secured through real and perceived independence. I remind all and sundry that as far as governance and the rule of law are concerned, we are a country of laws. As such, we must not and should not seek to circumvent the spirit and intent of the Constitution, whether by legislation, policy, convention, or practice. It is my sincere hope, and for the sake of our country, that there was no quid pro quo negotiated deal at the heart of this bill. It is my hope that the governing side would put forth a convincing and credible argument in support of the principle of the common good, a basic litmus test of governance that every piece of legislation and policy must pass. Mr. Speaker, I note that the Pensions Amendment Bill 2017, which is before us today, will come into force on the 1st of October 2017. Its effect will repeal Section 5 of the Act, replacing it with a paragraph 2 that essentially removes parity between permanent secretaries and the Commissioner of Police, the Commander of the Defense Force, by reducing the required years of service as Commissioner or Commander from 10 years to 7. Until now, for the purposes of pension, permanent secretaries, including the Secretary of the Cabinet and Financial Secretary, the Commissioner of Police, and the Commander of the Defense Force, they all were lumped into one category, requiring services of up to 10 years. Together, their term, as I said, to secure full pension required tenure for a minimum period of 40 years in the public service, or a minimum period of 25 years to include at least 10 years of those years as permanent secretary, or Commissioner of Police, or Commander of the Police Force, Commander of the Defense Force. Given these points that I've raised, why has this amendment been put before us? Why is it so urgent that it will come into force on a date that has already passed? Does this represent political interference? With a fair litmus test, I put it to you that even though common good is not an object that we can see and touch and feel, certainly this amendment does not even pass what I call the sniff test. Since it does not pass the sniff test, I will call this bill the Ellison Greenslade Amendment. I'll tell you why. The law is the force behind all tangible things that a society may possess. And while the law is akin to a living creature, it should not be manipulated to suit an individual's purpose, whether that individual is the subject or the subjector. Mr. Speaker, Scripture tells us that there's nothing new under the sun. Nothing. There's a reason for this. Whenever there is an attempt at reinventing the wheel, we end up with anomalies. Whenever we attempt to be innovative within a system, we end up considering atrocities. It is obvious that this proposal was not subjected to basic scrutiny or thought. Nobody asks the tough but simple questions. Have we done this before? What happened then? Has anyone else done this before? Can we find out? The side opposite has not based this proposal on the foundation of the common good. It will be interesting to learn. It will be interesting to learn what benchmark was used for this purpose. Why 7 years? During the ceremony of the handover of the office of the Commissioner of Police last week, the Prime Minister, the member for Kalani, announced numerous strategies to fight crime on every level and to fight corruption in the Bahamas. Somehow, the issue of term limits came up. And he announced his government's intention to reintroduce term limits for the Commissioner of Police and introduce term limits for the Commander of the Defense Force. I think that's already there. And the Commissioner of Corrections, that may also be there. Right? And I think he indicated that it will be 5 years. That's what he announced. So why 7 years when you think about the term limit that has been proposed to be exacted now on serving commissioners? Let's sniff this. Let's sniff it using the sniff test. Let's look at the Tribune article dated Monday, October 16th, 2017, under the headline, Greenslade assured his full pension. It reads, although he served in the police force for fewer than 40 years and as Commissioner of Police for fewer than 10 years, outgoing Police Commissioner Ellison Greenslade will receive maximum pension benefits because the Minister administration intends to amend the Pension Act. Attorney General Carl Beckel confirmed yesterday. We are bringing legislation to amend the Pensions Act to capture and formalize what occurred in the 1980s, where Richard Demerit, the Auditor General at the time, was permitted, listen, you'll see the distinction, Richard Demerit, the Auditor General at the time, was permitted to complete his pensionable time while serving as Commissioner to the High Court, to the Court of St. James. That practice allowed him to complete his pensionable years in that capacity. He's not, the distinction here is that the Commissioner is not being allowed to complete his term. It's being truncated. And we are now amending the law to reduce his time of service so as to suit him. For my part, Mr. Speaker, I have no personal grievance toward the former Commissioner of Police, now High Commissioner. In fact, I hold him in very high regard, as do his colleagues. He's a good Cat Island man. In fact, that's right, and Hartman Munker, I think, is his great granduncle, if I'm not mistaken. Related, right? So he's well known to me. In fact, our record on this side reflects that we took steps to ensure that the office of Commissioner of Police was protected from political interference by re-establishing tenure in 2012. Right? That's what we did in 2012. We saw term limits. We saw term limits as a mischief to gross interference under the law that they had passed in 2009. At that time, the holders of the top 2 positions of the force were appointed to these positions for a 5-year period. The law also permitted their terms to be extended for a period of no longer than 5 years, a further period of no longer than 5 years. This side, therefore, has no beef against Ellison Greenslade getting what he deserves. My challenge is simply based on the fact that the perception is now that we are negotiating the law to serve our purpose and not the common good, right? Not the common good. It's more than perception. There are several options in law that could have been considered as benchmarks. Even their 2009 model of 5-year terms. Judicial officers have the 5-year judicial office. So there are several options that could be considered, Mr. Speaker, right? Judicial officers, but they could use the model of 5 years, for example. Judicial officers have the 5-year provision. They need to serve 5 years and they'll be entitled to their pension. We know the Governor General has no specified time for service to secure a pension. I'm just pointing out anomalies that could be results when you deal not with the common good. Why not 8 years then, Mr. Speaker? Why not 8 years, Mr. Speaker, consistent with the provisions of Section 4 of the Parliamentary Pensions Act, which provides that prime ministers, MPs, and senators must serve at least 8 years or 2 full parliamentary terms, whichever is the lesser. Why not 8 years consistent again for the Pensions Act for permanent secretaries that was accelerated between the 1st of July 2000 and the 30th of June 2012? The question is, why 7 years if it is for the common good? I'm sniffing, and I cannot get around the thought that I'm sniffing, and I can't get around the thought, Mr. Speaker, that the departure of the commissioner, I cannot get around the thought that the departure of the commissioner was negotiated rather than voluntary, particularly with the personalities involved. I cannot get around the thought that the departure of the commissioner was negotiated rather than voluntary, particularly with the personalities involved, and after all that transpired since this government took office. Literally, the commissioner went missing in action. There's no room in good government for even the appearance that this is a shotgun separation. It complicates issues and, in the final result, hampers transparency. In fact, it was done. It has done just that. We are today debating the Ellison Greenslade bill. After 4 precarious months with an absent commissioner and rampant crime, our country has suffered tremendously because selfish motivation trumped the common good. This government came to power on a promise to be transparent, but failed to discuss Commissioner Greenslade's future despite repeated questions in the media and from this side. At every turn, the question was, where is the Commissioner of Police? Even the Prime Minister's own press secretary, was silent. The press secretary, according to the official announcement of his appointment, represents what? The resolve of the Prime Minister to make transparency one of the watchwords of his Free National Movement government. Even he was silent. He, after much prodding, only pointed to the fact that the Deputy Commissioner was the acting Commissioner of Police, while Greenslade is on vacation. My former colleague, Damian Gomez, I think said it best. Given what is being reported about Mr. Greenslade, that is, negotiations to have him leave his independent post to take up a position working directly under the Prime Minister, what's happening now is causing great disquiet because many people suspect that the system is being abused. The Minister of National Security only made matters worse. When asked about the situation, he was quoted as saying in the Tribune of September 22nd, at the appropriate time, the Prime Minister will make his comment. But no gun is being held to anyone's head to say they must leave. Mr. Greenslade is still the Commissioner. He went on to say, the Commissioner is still the Commissioner. He's currently on leave. He has a large amount of leave. Listen, the force functions this way, has been functioning this way for a very long time. The Commissioner takes leave, and there are provisions for an acting Commissioner, so that the force doesn't miss a beat. The force is bigger than any one individual. He is not being forced out. The Commissioner cannot be forced out. He is entitled to his leave. He took his leave, and so an acting Commissioner assumes that position, because the force is not built on one person. You listen to that? Isn't that what he said? It is built on thousands of individuals at various ranks. And so if one takes leave, there are provisions for someone else to assume that position. But the force did miss a beat. As I said before, while the Commissioner was on leave, crime skyrocketed. It seemed that there were shootings on a daily basis. Murders increased, even as the newspaper were reluctant to report it. Mr. Speaker, I get back to the question: why 7 years? In this place, we should avoid making laws to suit whims rather than the common good. This government seems to have a penchant for making whimsical decisions.
Honourable Member, the member from Mount Moriah on a point of order.
stop the clock.
Point of order.
What's the point of order, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, the point of order is?
Yes.
What is the point of order?
What? Please
Yeah,
state the point of order.
The member has asserted certain things that I feel are incorrect, right? Because Mr. Speaker, misleading Mr. Speaker, I have the floor, member. Honorable, Mr. Speaker.
Yes. State the point of order, honorable member.
Rule 37. Yeah? Yeah. 27. Okay. Mr. Speaker, 33,
3320.
27F.
27F.
Mr. Speaker.
It's indicated 3327F,
Yes.
which is to offer an explanation for some material part of his speech.
Yes.
27F.
That's correct. He.
Newspaper article, what he said, one, and in that he said that no beat is missed. And I said a beat was missed. And I just pointed out in his absence that crime went up. Now that's what I said. Yeah. And that's what I'm saying. No. Well, you'll have an opportunity to correct that whenever you address the chamber. The rules does not cover that, Mr. Speaker. That's my view. That's my view and opinion. So he'll have to, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member. Honorable member. The member from Mount Moriah did speak earlier, and he did speak to crime matters. He did speak to crime matters. He wasn't specific as you were.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member for Cat Island often stands before this House on a regular basis and speaks to his experience and time within this House itself. The member, during his contribution, would have made a few comments that were not supported. So I'm asking the member now to support those comments or withdraw them. He articulated that since the commissioner demitted office, crime actually escalated. I would like for the member to produce statistical fact to prove that. Because as a matter of fact, we had more murders during the first 4 months of this year than we had 58 murders from January to April. Okay? And so my statistics is telling me that during the first quarter of this year, we had more crime than almost any period during the year. So if the member if the member is making that assertion, then I would like for this member to bring facts, right, to back up that assertion or to withdraw his comments.
Honorable member for, the chair recognizes honorable member for Cat Island, Rumkey, San Salvador.
I said in this place very often that, I don't know whether the member goes fishing, but you can't catch no fish until he opens his mouth. I now realize I didn't speak about the commissioner demitting office. Right? He said demit. He used the word demit. Demit. He said demit office. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members.
Lock my time. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm responding to this. Mr. Speaker, what I said, he said I was speaking as to when the minister went on vacation. As far as Commissioner, I only know him to have committed office just very recently. Right? That, very recently. But that was the original intent, for him to get out, for him to be demitted from they were elected. So now, and when he was appointed the Minister of National Security, always in his mind, he got to go. Demit office, demit office. He was on vacation, like you say, right? And now, Mr. Speaker, in response to what I'm saying, what I said is that, I said that crime skyrocketed. Crime skyrocketed. It seemed that there were shootings on a daily basis. That's what I'm repeating what I said, Mr. Speaker.
Well, I'm asking you to
I'm saying it seemed to me, that's an opinion, that's my view. If the minister has the opportunity to bring the stats, he has the facts. He has the stats, so he can bring it and share it with us. Right? And that's what I said, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I said. I said.
Honorable member, to resolve it.
That it hasn't, nothing much has changed, and the member would know. Look at what has been taking place in this country in recent weeks.
Mr. Speaker, let me just. What I said. No. Mr. Speaker, the minister has said that crime has not gone up since they assumed office. Right? That's what you said, right? And I just want to say is that if you were telling me that, yeah.
Let me interrupt because I may not be official, but you need to listen attentively, please. Okay? What I am saying here, and I've said it over and over in the press, everywhere I go, that crime is at an unacceptable level in this country. It did not start at post-May 10th. And the member seems to be suggesting that, for which he is totally incorrect. He is totally incorrect. And so if he is making those assertions, then I ask that the member produce statistical information to back up the assertion that he's making. If he's unable to do so, we ask that the member withdraw his comments. Thank you.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Cat Island.
If I could answer Seriatim and put on this matter, right? I said they took issue with me saying that crime skyrocketed. That's what I said.
While the commissioner was on vacation.
Yes, I said, I could say.
That is not true.
And there's no, I'm not. If the Minister of Security, National Security, is telling me that's not true, I trust what he says, and I ask him to verify with the stats. That's the first point. And until that time, I will withdraw a statement.
Honourable member. Honourable member. Honourable member. I
said I withdraw the statement. But I withdraw the statement because the Minister of National Security is telling me that is not true. I trust what he has to say, said, but I just ask him to verify it. He has the stats, and I expect to see the stats at some time in the future. That's what I said, right? So that is what I say about that. I trust what he says. He's the minister. He has the stats, right? So perhaps he can bring the stats to us later on. Now, Mr. Speaker. Yeah. No, my deputy is reminding me. My deputy is reminding me that the minister said before the campaign that he had all the answers, and now he's saying nothing changed. So he ain't got the answers no more. That's what he reminded me of. So, Mr. Speaker, let me get back to the question. I get back to the question. Why 7 years? In this space, Mr. Speaker, we should avoid making laws to suit whims rather than the common good. This government seems to have a penchant for making whimsical decisions. Since the presentation of the budget, They're pronounced doom and gloom over the Bahamas, opening our bare cupboards to the world, telling tales of missing money, and making every effort to portray our beloved nation as corrupt. People are being fired all around us, and we have tax relief for those who can afford to pay. Crime is a critical issue. Immigration has convoluted and critical issues. In all of this, the member for Kalani discovered that there is just enough float to increase salaries of members of parliament. But building float, man.
We building float now.
We talk about building float.
We building float.
But Mr. Speaker, it's the people's time. The member for Elizabeth, was just the other day lamenting that we are losing nurses. I think he even alluded to the fact that some of them could make $75,000 a year when they travel. Well, I say pay them more money and we will lose them. Public officers are giving their best to themselves for very low salaries. Pay them more money. We depend on them for advice in government. Pay them. Then we could talk about ourselves. Since we can find money now, pay them now. Before I take my seat, Mr. Speaker, I take this opportunity to condemn the Member of Parliament for Kalani for bringing personal information of private citizens in this place. See, I could do the same thing. I know for a fact that you're all paying someone right now close to $200,000 a year. 150 in one way, 50 another way. Plus taking care of his children. I'm not going to call your names. I could bring these things. Right? I call nobody name. Who this? You know this? You could tell me this, right? I could do that. I call no names, but right? But those of you should know, right? Some of you don't know who it is, but Kalani called names. By laying the document on the table, the names have been called.
On more than one occasion.
Anyone could come, and on more than one occasion, he's called person's name in here, on their personal business. But but I'm just saying, I'm reminded this house that we could all do that. We could all do that, right? It's the common good, Mr. Speaker, that we should seek to build up, not to tear down. And Mr. Speaker, and that's what we on this side support, that what we do must always be done to build up the common good. Mr. Speaker, as I said, we think that the commissioner should get his just dues, but it has to be done on the premise of truth and what is fact. This appears to be a negotiated separation rather than a voluntary act, and it does not prove well for the common good. Thank you.
As many? The chair recognizes the honourable member for Garden Hills.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this amendment to the Pensions Act 2017. However, sir, before I begin, I wish to greet the great people from the constituency of Garden Hills who vested in me the responsibility of representing them in this honorable house. On behalf of the people of Garden Hills, Mr. Speaker, I want to congratulate the brilliant young Bahamians, all of those residents in Garden Hills who participated in the Youth in Parliament exercise a few days ago. I was so proud of them, Mr. Speaker. Proud because I know Garden Hills and the rest of the Bahamas is in good hands. And so I commend Selena Roll, who spoke on behalf of Marathon, but lives on Soldier Road. I also commend Gabrielle McKenzie, who represented the great constituency of Centerville, but who lives in Pride Estates. And so, Mr. Speaker, I am comfortable that the residents of Garden Hills in the Bahamas has benefited tremendously and will benefit tremendously in the future from these young individuals. And I want to commend them on behalf of every single resident in Garden Hills. Mr. Speaker, earlier today, we paid a visit to Butler's Funeral Home. And I want to extend to the family of Calvin Johnson my sincere condolences to his family, because he has been a rock in the FNM, a foundation. Calvin, with that great smile of his, never being negative, always believed that what he wanted to do could be done. And he was always working in the best interest of the Bahamian people. So I commend him. And I commend him and his family for his effort. Sometimes in this parliament, it's a tough place to be. But Calvin always smiled. He always believed that he could work things out for his constituents. And in many cases, he did. Mr. Speaker, I also want to give some praise and recognition to our esteemed leader. He's been under the gun and under fire for statements that he made. But I say only this, that it's best to speak truth to power than to be a hypocrite. And so, if just last week the PLP was in support of a bill, and they held their fingers up in there and the wind shifted, and by Sunday they changed their mind, I understand that's how they work. The Bahamian people knows how they work. And so, all I'm going to say, Mr. Speaker, is this. If you want to lead in government, you got to make some tough decisions. You got to do the heavy lifting. And when you go on the record, in this country today, Mr. Speaker, it's WhatsApp, it's Facebook, it's FaceTime, it's all these kind of things. You too.
And don't forget Jeffrey.
And so if you say on Friday, this was a good thing, I wonder what happened between Friday and Sunday that made it so bad. And so, Mr. Speaker, I don't talk. I told my good friend who's the MP for Exuma that sometimes you got to give the young MPs a little pass. And so I'm going to give my colleague from Exuma a little pass. I'm not going to comment on this comment, but I will say this much. He has worked in the trenches. He's got some FNM blood in him. A lot of FNM blood. He's from Forbes Hill, you see. He's from Forbes Hill. Don't let me speak to that.
No, we got the red Manchurian over there.
No,
Manchurian.
I know when my watershed was. I know when my watershed was Mr. Leader of the opposition. It happened while the teachers were on strike. My mother was a leader in the PLP. Everybody knows that. She was a good leader. And George Smith called on her every time. She signed this form for nomination form every single year until he went to the commission. Every single year. And she told him, I'm a pastor. Some questions coming up. I little confuddled here. And the rest is history. But my watershed, Mr. Deputy, so that you know, I was a teacher, an active member in the Bahamas Union of Teachers. I was a leader of what they call the strike force. And we went on strike, and we're striking, in my opinion, and still believe, for the improvements of our schools and students throughout the Bahamas. And we had a meeting with the then leader of the government, Mr. Pinling, and he said to us, you're only interested in these Bahamian children. And we said to him, well, show us where you take your personal money and invest it in these children. And his response at that time was, give us the keys. And we gave him the keys to the school. And I had voted for the PLP once before that, and never since. So yes, I do have a little, one vein of PLP in me, one vein. But that vein only speaks to the fairness. Now don't let me talk your business. I keep on, see, Exomo, don't mind the fella sitting, yes, yes. Don't mind the fellow who's sitting next to you. He say he gets some little heritage in Exomo, but he's always claimed me from Cat Island, although he like to go to Exomo. Yes, absolutely. And I'm solidly in the Free National Movement tent. I'm solidly committed to the Free National Movement, where there's only one leader, and he speaks for this party. Mr. Speaker, the Member of Parliament for Cat Island, Rumpkins, and Salvador made a very important point. He said public policy should be used to promote the common good. That's a very good point. But I wonder where he was, Mr. Speaker, when his party took the now Member of Parliament for Yellow Elder and Stapleton, what do you call it now? Mount Moriah, who was head of commercial crime, and said to him, as the Deputy Commissioner of Police, go to the airport and count planes, see how much little commercial one-engine plane land on the airport. I wonder if that was in the public's good. I wonder if the member of Cat Island, Rumpkins, and Salvador is telling me that that decision, that particular decision, was made in the public's good. No, I'm not going to hurt anybody, Mr. Speaker. All I'm saying to you is that if you say, or if you believe, no, you don't have to answer me. I wasn't asking a question of you. I'm not getting away from my big.
No, he's not yielding.
No,
He's not yielding.
no, Mr. Speaker. No, Mr. Speaker.
Yield not.
All I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, is the whole question of public policy. All I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, is the whole question of public policy, and or the suggestion advanced by Rumpke and the suggestion that perhaps this party was not forthright in dealing with the Commissioner of Police. Mr. Speaker, all I could do is use his own words. He's a man. I respect him highly.
He's not delusional. He was not
Highly respected in this country. And so I want to read, Mr. Speaker, just some of the things he said. Yes. I'm talking about Commissioner, now His Excellency Ellison Greenslade.
Yeah, I know where he comes from.
And
I walk the same street.
And-
Just state the date and the source.
yes, this is from the Tribune of Tuesday, October 31. And he said, Mr. Speaker, this is what he said. He said, let me be very forthright. I'm speaking the words of Commissioner Greenslade. Let me be very forthright in telling you that I was not forced out of the Royal Bahamas Police Force. And then he went on to say, the Prime Minister currently has treated me with the greatest measure of respect from the day he won the election. From day one, Mr. Speaker. They are his words. That is what he said. What he said. And so to come to this place, Mr. Speaker, to not only muddy my colleague, but to speak to some of the things that are so untrue. You know, I came to this place and I said to my colleagues, I don't know what to say, so I'll just talk about a general view of what pensions in the public service exist and how we calculate and stuff. But to hear the leader of the opposition, newly elected leader, fellow get 40% Exuma blood in it. 60% get island. and Mr. Speaker, quite frankly, you know, he showed his card. Us fellas from Exuma could be a little upset with him. Because the fellow who replaced Mr. Greenslade, Commissioner Greenslade, hails from Exuma. I would have anticipated that the member for Cat Island, because of his Exuma blood, like I say, I would expect him to boost him up equally as he's done Mr. Greenslade, who's from Cat Island. Yes. And so, Mr. Speaker, I could only fall back to what the commissioner said. He said from day one, when the Prime Minister was elected, the Prime Minister treated him with uttermost respect. And if, Mr. Speaker, you were at his handing over ceremony, the first person he congratulated was the former Prime Minister Hubert Ingram. Very first person. I was curious as to why he did not say anything about them fellas. Just curious. But he commended highly the fact that Hubert Ingram placed great trust in him and made him Commissioner of Police. He commended our Prime Minister for showing him the greatest respect from day one. And then he said, Mr. Speaker, it is time for me to move on. His words. So to come here today, to push or to give the impression, to imply that we in the FNM would do such a thing is totally unfair, uncalled for. And as a senior member in this House, I would expect, perhaps I would have given a little pass if your deputy had said that. Because he only been here 6 months. But if you've been here 30 years, Mr. Leader, you can't come here in the face of what Mr. Greenslade said. And I could believe him. I'm sure you believe him. He's a Cat Island man. You represent Cat Island. No, you don't have to know. You can just take what he say. Don't come here suggesting that he is lying, because the commissioner don't lie.
Bring the evidence or withdraw it. Bring the evidence or withdraw it.
That's what he said.
Bring it or
He
withdraw
said,
it.
well, that he was satisfied to say it.
That's what he said.
The fact is, I could only believe he said it, and he said it based on his feeling and based on how he was treated by our Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I know you'll get to the next bill, but that ain't coming yet, because until you could, I know.
Until you say you need that money, we ain't bringing it.
I don't. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, yes, Mr. Speaker, I don't want my good MP for South Andrews to get in this, you know, because kind of me and him in the same boat. Yeah, that's what I mean. Don't mind them fellas from Cat Island. They loaded. They loaded. So you should keep quiet, you know. Stay small like me. And don't follow them fellas. You know, they always wanted to put you out, you know. But you are a survivor. And you could be there another time. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. The Pensions Act basically guarantees individuals who are working for government after 5 years a pension. 5 years. You could work for the government for 5 years if you're on the permanent pensionable, meaning if you come into government at 60 and you work for those 5 years, you could get a small pension. And you could get two types of pension, basically. Some persons get, for the most part, if you're working for government for 40 years and more, lots of us say, well, I better take this lump sum up front. I better take this big payment up front and a reduced pension. Those are the kinds of things that could happen in the public service. So Commissioner Greenslade has opted to take a pension, and we in the public service had to make some adjustments. Now, the members' office had to realize, and I'm sure they could remember when the Free National Movement had advanced the position that commissioners of police should work for 10 years. They objected to that, and they changed 10 years, like permanent secretaries. And you objected to that, and you say no, and we were about to I don't know whose bill it is. You know, you could call it any name you wish. The point is, Bahamians benefit on both sides. And these bills, and this one that is before you, will benefit not only the Commissioner of Police, but the Commander of the Defense Force. Yeah. And it's unfortunate that you have not mentioned that, because we believe that they should be treated equally. That's what we believe. Now, if you believe different, you will come into office when my homeboy is the leader of the party, probably in 2026 or 7 or something thereabouts, and you may change it. But generally speaking, Mr. Speaker, once you serve the government faithfully, you're entitled to a pension. And the Commissioner of Police is no different. And to suggest otherwise is different. Mr. Speaker, pensions given in the public service are not, generally speaking, generous. But again, you earn a pension for your life. And that is why persons are eager to get into public service, because they want to get a pension. So if they retire at 65 and they live to 80, they get pensions between 65 and 80. And so that's why there's a rush for individuals to come into the public service. And we understand that fully. And this is a non-contributory pension. It's given by the government. And I want to commend all the governments who, over the years, have continued that process. And some of us believe, and some of us, there's some rumblings on the ground, that we should change that process for new persons coming in, because the country may not be able to sustain that level of contribution. But that will come, Mr. Speaker, as we move forward. Mr. Speaker, in addition to the pensions given to somebody who's pensionable, when someone dies, some form of remuneration is given to their estate or their wife or somebody once the funeral bills are paid. And so the government are really generous in making sure that persons who work for the government goes into the sunset with something in their pockets, because in many cases that is what they get for life. Mr. Speaker, the Member of Parliament for Cat Island, Rumpkins, and Salvador was talking about the whole question of doing good in the interest of the public for public policy. And so I say to you, that is exactly why this Free National Movement government, and this is government of the Bahamas, selected Commissioner Greenslade to be the next High Commissioner to London. The breadth of his job description as High Commissioner requires energy, skill, knowledge of the Bahamas, and the ability to articulate the vision of this government. Who better to do this than Commissioner, His Excellency now, Ellison Greenslade. He's young. He's intelligent. He's fearless. He's articulate. And he takes with him, Mr. Speaker, one of the first students I had in Exuma, his lovely wife, Kim. And so I want to congratulate the Commissioner. Now, Excellency Greenslade, I want to congratulate him on his accomplishments. The fact that he has now moved to a high office. He is strengthening the Foreign Service, I'm told by the Minister of Foreign Affairs. This is not just pushing an officer aside. This High Commissioner will have access to everything in the UK, in Sweden, in France, in Germany, in Greece, in Italy, in Ireland, in Malta, in South Africa. Mr. Speaker, we are very pleased as a government that is transparent to have a man of that stature accept such an appointment. We believe that he will help us as we move on the world stage. We believe that because he has proven while he was a commissioner that he could do such a thing. And so, Mr. Speaker, that is why we're very comfortable with the pension that he's getting. That is why, Mr. Speaker, he has been selected by the Prime Minister for such a task. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, I was a little bit disappointed to come here today to get into the minutiae and the small things when such a man of his stature. I also want to commend, Mr. Speaker, his replacement, a great Exomian, a very humble man. Yes. A very humble man, Mr. Speaker. If you don't know Anthony Ferguson and you see him with a group of policemen, you may never know he is a commissioner. That's just him. He's come from a family background of trust and strong, although he comes from one of those communities in Exuma that don't support us so much, so I say that easy. but Mr. Speaker, for this choice alone, I believe the Free National Movement get more votes than Mount Thompson that they ever gotten before. Because we have pulled out one of our greatest. Yes. No, he ain't getting nervous. He's trying to work on my hometown. Yeah, but you know, the score has not changed from when I was a boy. The numbers don't lie. And so, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of every single Exomian, I'm sure the member for Exuma supports me when I say we are extremely delighted for the force now, in my opinion, not only will continue to do great, but you have some Exuma onion in his feet, and he could fix up that stew really good. And so I'm gonna, in advance, ask every single Exomian to support this great man, for he deserves our support. Yes. And I ask the country to give him an opportunity and watch him do well. And so, Mr. Speaker, this entire exercise is really about the government selecting the best person for the job. As we look over our horizon, we want to make sure, Mr. Speaker, as we select our consul generals and ambassadors, that they have work to do. They have work to do on behalf of the Bahamas. And I commend the Prime Minister for selecting such a great group. And I congratulate His Excellency Ellison Greenslade and his family on their appointment. God and ill support.
As many? The chair recognizes the honorable member for Yamacraw.
Mr. Speaker, it is my delight to wrap up the debate on this bill. When I got up this morning to begin the debate, I said that it was a pleasure, and it's still a pleasure, to debate this bill that moves to amend the Pensions Act. So I start where my illustrious senior in the party ended by highlighting the good character of Mr. Elliston Greenslade. When I started this morning, and I like to start my debates by giving a comprehensive history to matters to which I discuss or to which I would contribute to. I spoke to the valiant gentlemen who have led the Royal Bahamas Police Force, and no less a person I made mention of, Mr. Elliston Greenslade. Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier this morning, the bill is timely, it is equitable, it is just, and it is fair. And from what I heard here today, with one exception, Mr. Speaker, there was a resounding chorus of persons speaking to the proactivity of the bill, to how equitable the bill is for someone who have served this country unquestionably for the past 38 years. And I say that because I have personal knowledge. I spoke of my experience in the Royal Bahamas Police Force. And I know there's a song sometimes that I quote that, sometimes people think that the song is about them. But this bill is not only about the Commissioner of Police. And this bill is not about us. And for those of us who may want to use this occasion to grandstand to the disadvantage of a good gentleman. And as I said, Mr. Speaker, there was a chorus of persons who lend their support to this bill. But on two occasions, I've had the opportunity to sit in this honorable place when we moved the bill to amend the Constitution. And now on this occasion, as we move this bill to amend the Pensions Act, and I've heard my learned, a gentleman that I respect and hold in high regard, indicate his dissatisfaction with the pieces of legislation, but at the end of the day says that he supports them, and if I could add my words, 100%. And I'm lost. Is the Cat Island saying, sometimes when I hear that type of talk, I'm more confused than 10 spread in a paper bag, and I know he could understand what I'm saying. Because how do you say in one breath that the Commissioner is an excellent man, that he deserves what is being done, and then at the end of it say that you support it and you will vote for it, and then you highlight circumstances that are totally unattached to what we're discussing? Persons have used this bill to launch an attack on the Minister of National Security, and I shouted across the floor, and perhaps it shows my somewhat a degree of immaturity on my part for doing that. But what came to mind is what Angliston said in September, after billboards were placed all over this country. She said in September in an article that this whole issue of crime requires a collaborative approach. When the issue of crime came up just before the elections, I heard everybody screaming that it requires a collaborative approach. The Minister of National Security on many occasions, and I know from whence he draws his conclusion, from the different crime reports. And when it looks at crime, it looks at the home, the church, and all of the ways that we've fallen down socially to cause this phenomena that is existent in our society today. So I was very disheartened when on one hand, we could speak to the good reputation of Mr. Elliston Greenslade, why he's deserving of every penny that will come to him by way of this legislation, how we could highlight all of the good things that he has done, but in another breath, criticize the whole thing. And that is confusing. What is the point of order?
The chair recognizes the honourable member
On a matter of clarification.
South
sir.
and Central.
Yes, Mr. Speaker,
Andres.
I don't want to belabor it because,
Honourable member,
Mr. Speaker, I want to make this point quick in 5 seconds.
you don't have a point of order on a point of
Mr. Speaker,
clarification.
point of clarification. Mr. Speaker, I want to say this to the member, the good member for Yamacraw. Young man I admire. The fact of the matter is, if you were personalizing the bill, that's what we tried to avoid, and we were very guarded about that, by simply imputing the former commissioner, police commissioner, now high commissioner to London and the United Kingdom, directly into this discussion. The member for Cat Island spoke about what he called what could be good legislation and how it could be misleading and be used for at bad timing. But now when you're going to make sure, he actually talked about the fact that you don't want this to be called the Ellison Greenslade bill. And by extension, member for Yamacraw is doing the same. So at the end of the day, he's actually inferring even more than what the member for Cat Island, in my view, would have said. And that's what I ask members to be guarded or be careful with. Because we don't want to go down that same path. Because everyone in this country it's a very small community, and we all have families. That's what I'm saying, Mr. Speaker. Let's be careful with that.
Mr. Speaker, I was lucidly clear when I said, I said a song that I know that sometimes people think things are about them. And I said that this bill was more expansive than Mr. Greenslade. I didn't say that the bill was the Ellison Greenslade bill. It was said across the floor that other bills that were presented were named after certain individuals. I am simply, Mr. Speaker, I am simply speaking truth when I speak to the good character of Mr. Greenslade. Mr. Speaker, there was also some mention made of tenure. Unless Mr. Greenslade is delusional, unless he was just released from the asylum when he spoke on the day when he demitted office, he said that he indicated that there was no coercion. There was no force applied. He thanked the government, and he looked forward to his retirement, and he looked forward to serving this country. So when I speak, I only speak to the good character of the gentleman as I know him. And when I say I know him, I don't make up that story. I was a member of the Royal Bahamas Police Force. He served in SIB where I served. I knew when he went to the islands and served on Keys. I knew when he left SIB and what he did. So I'm simply saying, and when I speak to the whole circumstances with the Minister of National Security, I just speak to what the member said. And all I simply quoted from articles which Anglican quoted from, members quoted from before the elections, and how they all seem to be together, a collaborative effort as Anglican suggested. In all the circumstances, Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted today to wrap up this debate. And to say, and I'm elated to see us working together. Like my good friend from Seabree said, can we all just get along? Well, this is a good example that the 4 members from the opposition joined with the members of the governing party to support this bill, this amendment. And so, Mr. Speaker, I so move. Thank you very much.
Thank you, honourable member. Further reading and committal of bills. It's been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a second time and committed. A bill for an act to amend the Pensions Act 2017. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Contrary will rise. Order that the bill be read a second time. For the second reading of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I do now move that the House do resolves itself into a committee of the whole with the Deputy Speaker and the Chair.
It's been moved and seconded that the House dissolve itself in the committee of the whole House with the Deputy Speaker and the Chair. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Contrary will rise. The Deputy Speaker will now take the chair.
My cousin Arnold murdered me now. My cousin Arnold murdered me in Texas, you know. I decided to find a new.
Go ahead, Mr. Wells. Mr. Wells. Mr. Wells.
Committee of the Whole.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I do move that the long title of the bill be agreed.
Being moved and second that the long title of the bill be agreed. Those in favor will remain seated. Those opposing will stand. The motion is, the long title of the bill is agreed. As many.
Mr. Chair, I move that the short title and commencement of the bill be agreed.
It's being moved and second that the short title and commencement be agreed. As many as that are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The short title and commencement have been agreed. As many.
Mr. Chair, I do move that Clause 2 of the bill be agreed.
Being moved and second that Clause 2 of the bill be agreed. Those in favor will remain seated. Those opposing will stand. Clause 2 has been agreed.
Mr. Speaker, I do now move that Clause 3 of the bill be agreed.
Being moved and second that Clause 3 of the bill be agreed. Those in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. Clause 3 of the bill has been agreed.
Mr. Chair, I do now move that the bill be agreed in its entirety.
Being moved and second that the bill in its entirety be agreed. Those in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The bill in its entirety has been agreed.
Mr. Chair, I do now move that the Speaker take the chair.
Being moved and second that the Speaker will take the chair. As many as an agreement will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The Speaker now do take the chair. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through the bill and there's been no amendments.
Honorable members, the Deputy Speaker and Chairman of the whole House, or Committee of the whole House, has reported that the committee has gone through the bill and has not made any amendments thereto. Third reading and passing of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I do move that the bill be read a third time and passed.
Is there a seconder? It has been moved and seconded. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a third time and passed. As many as are in favor will remain seated. The contrary will rise. The bill will be read for a third time.
A bill for an act to amend the Pensions Act.
Order that this bill do now pass and the title thereof be declared to be Pensions Amendment Act 2017. For the third reading of bills.
There are no further third readings, Mr. Speaker.
Consideration of Senate amendments. Resolutions. Member statements. Appointment of select committee. Instructions to select committee. Discharge of select committee. Notices for future meetings. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to renew all matters in the name of the government and to signal that we will be back on November 15th, 2017 at 10 a.m.
Mr. Speaker, I rise also to renew all notices in the name of Majesty's Loyal Opposition and this Honorable House of Assembly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order that the bill duly passed today be taken by the clerk of this House to the Senate. Adjournment.
Mr. Speaker, I do now move that the House do adjourn until November 15th, 2017 at 10 a.m.
Second. It's been moved and seconded that the business of the House do adjourn to Wednesday, the 17th of November, the 15th of November at 10 a.m. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will rise. Business of the House stands adjourned to 10 a.m., 15th of November.